So we've had another YouGov poll, and I stress that is YouGov because there are a lot of smaller polls that have been coming out. Like we had a Find Out Now poll, put the Reform Party on 29%, and we don't always know how big and how trustworthy these other random polls are. But YouGov is, one of our sort of most well-known pollster in Britain, and they've now put Reform in the lead not just once but twice, which kind of suggests it wasn't just a fluke poll the first time. If they've got another poll now and they've gone up again another point, so we've now got the Reform Party on 27%, Labour on 25%, and Kemi Badenoch and the Tories trailing behind in 21%. So it's starting to look like it might just be possible for the Reform Party, given they've got 4 years left until the general election, to continue on their upward trajectory. If they do, they could potentially, if they get over 30%, be able to start making pretty big waves in a first past the post system, and perhaps alone without the Tories. But there's a lot of talk about a Tory Reform Pact. Now, that talk seems to primarily be coming from the Tories as opposed to Reform members or Reform MPs themselves, because the Tories are sort of desperate to make a pact to survive, but the Reform Party don't seem that interested at the moment. We've had Liz Truss. She's been at the ARC conference. She's been speaking to Darren, which we'll have a look at in a moment, but we'll just have a look at this briefly. So Liz Truss is now saying true blue Tory MPs should join forces with Reform. She says that she wants the best of Conservatives and Nigel Farage's party to get together. Now, some people won't listen to Liz Truss because they think that she's bonkers and she was a nightmare and she only lasted for a few days, but she seems to be trying to iron out her reputation. She's put out a book and she's doing more media appearances trying to give advice about what she thinks should happen. Let's have a little look at what she had to say to Darren at the conference, at the ARC conference.
Way to go. And I think the key thing is that whoever gets into government in 2029 has to massively overhaul our country and overhaul the state, because we're in a disastrous situation. People are being thrown in jail for Facebook posts, but we've got these appalling grooming gangs who have raped tens of thousands of girls. They've not all been brought to justice. It's been covered up. We've got a disastrous economy which is going down the drain, and it's not just Rachel Reeves is incompetent, which she is. It's also the Bank of England, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the Treasury. They're all responsible. So I think a MAGA movement in Britain has to be about completely changing the way our country is run. We've got to.
So there's a little bit of what Liz Truss had to say. That you may have heard a little ring there. Darren is on his way in to come and talk to us about what he's been up to at the ARC conference. So we've got Liz Truss there saying in the article that she thinks that there should be a pact with Reform. And then here, another question to also ask is, will it be possible, if Reform can get into power with or without the Tories, to actually sort out the mess that is the system, as Liz Truss might call it. This is a woman who claims that she came into power with the right ideas, but the whole system just worked against her and there was nothing that she could do. The Reform Party could well face the same troubles. We've had people like Dominic Cummings talk about ripping up the civil service and starting again, but it's quite hard to do when you actually get there, to have such a big overhaul like that when you've got so many forces working against you. I mean, Alex, what do you think? Do you think that Reform should consider any pact with the Tories? And do you think that they will be able to do all the meaningful things they talk about if they were to actually get into number 10?
My fear with a pact with the Tories is that the Tory it's not so much some of the politicians, because I mean, I know many Tory politicians and some of them are absolutely fantastic. I would have them in the Reform Party in seconds. I can name them, but you don't need to. You already all know who they are. So I'm not actually against many of the politicians joining the party. It is the machinery behind the Conservative Party that deeply worries me, because that machinery failed not only the Conservative Party itself, but it failed over 14 years in government to make any effectual change. As if you've watched any of Dom Cummings' speeches post exiting Downing Street, whilst you may have particular views about Dominic Cummings, he does understand the mechanics of government extremely well, and he is right about a lot of things. And you do need, and one thing the Tories do understand is they understand government extremely well. They do understand the mechanics of what makes the civil service tick. And those are the places in the civil service we need to go after extremely fast. Day one of being in government, if reform take over, they need to start before anything else doing what Trump is doing, and you go through the civil service and you cleanse it, because the civil service has become a toxic environment where nothing gets done, you can't affect change, and anything that you do try to get changed takes months and years, and by the time you've done anything, you're out of office. So I think my concern is that the machinery would come with it, but if you stripped the Tory machinery away and you took some of those fantastic Tory leadership people, and I'm talking about the Suella Bravermans, the Robert Jenricks, those types of people, I think they would strengthen reform's hand. And I think Jordan Peterson said something about this at our conference, and I think he might be right. I have a feeling there may have to be some deals done in the next election. If we're being realistic, and I really want reform to win, but there are certain places where we will kill each other. Reform and the Tories will knock each other out and give Labour the seats. And if you told me, and you say, Alex, there is a choice between having the Tories and Reform in some form of agreement, pact, and it will completely obliterate most of the left, I would do it, because we cannot afford we can't afford 4 years of this government, let alone 8 or 10. And if that ever becomes a reality, I mean, I think I'll be out of here. So, and I think many British people, if they could have the choice to leave, would leave as well. 8 years of Labour, that's my adult life gone to neglectful, terrible governments. So that's the way I'd put it to people. But I think we're a long way off yet. And I think if reform's surge continues like this, I don't think they'll have anything to worry about from the Tories.
Yeah. Now, Darren's very patiently waiting in the green room to tell us what he's been up to at the ARC conference, but we'll just get a very quick word on this from Charlie and Elliott. Now, Charlie, are you hoping that your buddies in the Tory party will team up with Reform so that they've got a chance at next general election, or do you think that would be a disaster for one or both of the parties?
I agree with Alex. Anything to get this government out, I think, should be done. I think it's just as in 2019, it was a conversation between Boris and Nigel, and Boris, I think, said to Nigel, look, stand down some of your Brexit Party candidates because, we don't want to split the vote. I think the momentum clearly is with Reform, and so it will be more of a conversation for Nigel to Kemi to say, I think you need to sort of stand down your sort of candidates rather than mine. So he's certainly got the upper hand. I don't think the Tories could ever really look at themselves and could ever be forgiven if they were somehow the cause of a split vote, which lets Labour in for another 4 or 5 years. It would look much more worse for them than it would Reform, because, as I say, they've got the momentum. So I'm sure that conversation will be had. And I think, I think that the trouble for Reform is, very quickly, is I think they are forming a coalition. They are forming that sort of Boris-y coalition in the Red Wall and in the South. And I think, Liz is calling for all Tories to join Reform. I'm not entirely sure if Reform would want all Tories to join them, because there'll be lots of people, particularly maybe in the North and that Red Wall, that don't necessarily agree with Liz Truss or Suella Braverman. They are old Labour voters that are going to Reform because they just genuinely want change from the old has-beens. So Reform have got a really difficult problem, I think. They're doing incredibly well. But I think their only problem is, who do they actually now let into their party? Everybody wants to get in, and so they've got to be really picky and choosy.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Elliott, last word to you. Deal or no deal? What do you reckon?
No deal under any circumstances, especially in a first past the post. I just don't think a deal is needed. If we had a system, for example, like France with a 2-round voting system, I would say absolutely, because then we would actually be splitting the vote. When you're in the first past the post system, you are not splitting the vote whatever party you vote for, because you have a right to vote for somebody and there's no second round. With this opinion that that you're splitting a vote is essentially saying like you have to vote for Labour or you have to vote for the Tories. And that is an archaic way of thinking. I think it's almost anti-democratic, because, like, again, you're forcing people to vote for Labour or Tory and trying to make them guilty if you vote for Lib Dem or for Reform or for whatever other party you're voting for. I do think an advantage would be, like Alex was mentioning, the experience of certain politicians in the Tory party, which would be good. However, you've got to question the motives as well. Are they jumping over from a sinking ship? I think some of them definitely will be. So I think it's important that Reform actually vets them properly and verifies that they're there for the right reasons. But ultimately, I think no deal, basically.
Yeah, we often get a lot of comments coming in from our viewers saying that they'd be absolutely furious if particular Tories were to.
I mean, I live in the Red Wall that up in the northeast, and there's if that happened up here, I think honestly Reform's vote would tank if that happened, because the Tories are basically non-existent anyway, apart from like the southern part of the region. But up in Sunderland, Newcastle, Durham, Northumberland, like there's just no one's interested in the Tories anymore.